Okay. Okay. I started recording. Okay. So hello, Ms. Heidenreich. I'm thrilled to interview you today because after I attended your workshop during the Forage National Science Summit back in all the way back in January, and with your guidance, I was able to slowly make progress on my GMO outreach project, and I am still doing it. In fact, so
That's
thank you so
awesome.
much.
That's so great. I'm super proud of you.
Thank you. So yeah, I guess we can start with the questions. So okay. So for the first one, so can you please explain about GM food, or I should say genetically engineered food?
Yeah, so genetically engineered food is one form of biotechnology that is used to produce food with less inputs, inputs being fuel, pesticide, chemicals, fertilizers, any of the costs associated with growing the food. So any type of engineering or genetic modifications that are done within either a lab or that are developed in a lab that are then produced, that's a genetically engineered food. So when those foods grow and are harvested, then they can be turned into food products.
Okay. So do you consider GM food to be safe?
I do. I absolutely do.
Okay. So and do you think that there's like enough information available about GM food, like especially in the US or even like in general, like the world?
So I think the tricky part is getting information out to the consumer public in a way that is both easy to understand, is factual, and is really descriptive of the true processes that take place. Because I think right now there's a lot of company buy-in and there's a lot of corporationism in the market, in the grocery store. So a lot of companies have a very large amount of money tied up in a lot of food products, whether they be genetically modified or not. So I think we have to look at things more from an education perspective rather than a marketing perspective. I think that's where a lot of the lines get blurred, and one company will slander or come out with all kinds of comments about the safety, the alleged safety, or other potentially negative effects from that food product, because it's a GMO or because it's not a GMO. The mud gets slung both ways. So I think right now the most important thing is to educate based on the need for the education rather than the need to sell product.
Okay. So, what do you think is like I would say, the main benefit of GM food?
So genetically modified or genetically engineered crops are really the only logical way to continue providing the volume of food for the world. So right now, we have a growing population. The population of the US, but also the world, is consistently increasing. And the amount of land that we have is not increasing. So in order to continue providing a safe, reliable, secure food source for all of the people in the world, we have to get smarter about the products or the crops that we grow, the things that we produce, and we have to make the most of the land that we have because we're not making any more land. We have to use that land in a smarter way. So I think, the most important thing, and just utilizing what we have in the smartest way possible in order to have the best outcome.
Okay. Have you ever? I was just wondering, have you ever bought organically grown food?
Yeah, I have bought organically grown food, but yeah.
Okay. So you don't really like purposefully like avoid like genetic engineered foods, right? Because it kind of like depends or something.
Not at all. When I am in the grocery store, I read labels on products. I um, am careful about what I purchase, but more for nutritional content, not necessarily the technology that was used to grow the food. So, I think I don't avoid GM foods. I would rather buy a genetically modified food because I know that that food has been produced in a sustainable way. It's been produced and grown according to the most recently available technology, and I think that's what we have to do as a human race, is adapt to the technology that we are able to produce. So to me, that genetically modified food is just as good, if not better, than, not necessarily better than an organic food, but it's the same as any food produced and is available in the grocery store. There's many, many, many different ways to produce food, to grow food, but we're all on the same team.
Okay. So do you feel that like you have like many, I would say many choices when it comes to like genetically modified food versus like organically grown food?
I think that's something that really depends on your geographic location. It depends on your income level, what you are able to purchase. And I think it also has a lot to do with what's locally available. So, the few things that I mentioned right there, we have the problem of food insecurity. And there are food deserts around the world, but also in the United States. So, in those food deserts, we don't have access to locally grown produce or fresh foods. Now, in order to solve that, genetic modification is a way to solve that, is to be able to provide food that lasts longer on the shelf, or to be able to provide food that maybe hadn't been grown in that region before, and has the ability now genetically to withstand drought or flooding that occurs in that area. So that's one way that genetic modification can solve that problem. The next problem is, being able to afford it. We know that organic food and a lot of the food that is marketed towards um, the healthy food, that it's marketed in a certain way, that it's a lot more expensive, and not everyone can afford that. So when families are trying to make a dollar stretch in a grocery store, they really have to take into account, yes, I can buy one package of organic carrots, but I can buy twice the size package of these non-organic carrots. What's the real difference there? They're both carrots. It's how they were grown. It's a difference in technique. They're both carrots. Neither one of them is the magical food, that's going to solve everything, but it's also completely safe. And that's one thing that I think a lot of people overlook, is in the United States, we have so many regulations on how food is produced. There are so many policies and procedures to follow that unsafe food isn't in the grocery store. Unsafe food doesn't make it to the grocery store. Unsafe food gets, quality control, gets tested, and doesn't get approved for sale. So I think that's one thing that really becomes misleading, is that any type of food production technique produces unsafe food by default. So I think that kind of covers that, but I think genetic modification can really come into play when we're, solving different issues that occur in the grocery store.
Okay. All right. So now this next one, so it actually has to do with labeling itself.
Mhm.
So you said that you read labels, right? Now, I recently heard about the whole kind of commotion going on between, like for example, if labels are actually trustable, because some people might not like trust the labels,
Mhm.
and some food products do not even have labels or something like that, right? So do you think that labels really should be mandatory, like whether if like the crop is kind of like GMO or not, or do you think it should be mandatory?
Okay, so labeling food is a very delicate subject because there are so many different food products that are available, especially in the United States. We're very blessed with a rich and diverse and secure food source. So when it comes to labeling products, we have to be very careful. One of the beauties of the American market, or the free market system, is the ability to market products how you wish to market them, and basically relying on consumers to determine the success or failure of a product. So we have entire companies that focus only on marketing. So there are entire teams of people behind packaging of food products, of all products, and how they design that package, it will determine how successful the product sales are. So when that comes into play, you have a lot of different themes that they're trying to pull out. So they're trying to appeal to your emotional side. They're trying to appeal to certain markets, certain groups of people who are going to be more interested in purchasing this specific item because of how it looks. So that comes into the whole labeling conversation, because the regulations surrounding labels, that is set by the FDA, the USDA, especially with, just generally processed products. There's a whole set of standards and guidelines for, fresh meat, for fresh produce, for things that are raw per se. But the processed foods have a lot less restrictions in their labeling. So people are a lot more free to play around with labeling of products. So that means that's where you get a lot of those labels that are intended to appeal to your emotions in order for you to purchase that product. You get labels that say, this product is the most nutritious, or this product is the healthiest, or this product is the best. It's got this label on it that a certain group created with the intent of appealing to a certain characteristic of people who are more likely to purchase this item because they have this certain label on it. So it's a very sticky subject, and it's something that I do believe we do need labels, because we have a right to know what's in our food. We have a right to know the basic data, about that food, that nutritional value. We need to know the list of ingredients. But necessarily labeling how it was produced, that's a little grayer for me. It'd be, like I said earlier, there's so many different ways to grow food. There's so many different agronomic techniques. It would be the difference between, saying, well, you should buy these chocolate chip cookies because the farmer that grew the wheat for the flour that was used in making these cookies used, liquid nitrogen, used like a slow release nitrogen versus a direct application. It's just, there's so many different ways you can go with it that it becomes even more difficult to enforce and really standardize across the board, because really saying genetically modified or not genetically modified, the line is so blurred. There's so many things that there are so many more things than you would really realize are genetically modified. And they've been around for years, and we've been doing it for years. And, it's never been a problem until it was employed as a marketing tactic.
And actually, and speaking of the whole nutritional value of the food, so would you buy genetically modified foods, if they were maybe you can say more nutritious than other foods?
I think it depends on the product. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons to grow genetically modified food. Some of it is dependent on nutritional value, but some of it just means that, this crop is going to stand better in the field, or, it's going to resist a certain insect. has not a lot to do with the nutritional value of that product. It's just making that crop more efficient and utilizing all of the technology that we have to make it as efficient as possible. Nutritional content, yes, you can use genetic modification for nutritional content. You can make things grow a certain way, or things that will put more energy into the production of that fruit, rather than the production of the leaves. It all has to do with the genetics and the alleles that are inside. But I think genetic modification goes so much further than just nutritional content that I would be amiss to say that nutritional content is higher with genetic modification, just because it's so much more than just nutritionally related.
Okay. And I was going to ask a similar question, except for instead of nutritious value, like if the GMOs were less expensive than the other foods. But again, so you would say that it would like depend on the product, right?
It would really, yeah, it would depend on the product. It would depend on the region that you're in. It depends on a lot of different things. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think the benefits of GM foods outweigh its risks?
I absolutely do. I think genetic modification is the future. And the risks that come with genetic modification are a drop in a bucket compared to the risks that we face if we do not sustainably continue growing food to feed the world. You're going to see a lot more nutritional problems. You're going to see more scarcities and, a lot less biodiversity. There's too many things at risk to not use genetic modification.
Okay. So you're not particularly like concerned with the possibility of like long-term health effects regarding like GMOs, right?
What was the question?
So you're not like concerned with like the possibility of like long-term health effects, right?
Absolutely not. I think the studies have proven themselves, GMOs do not cause cancer. There are a variety of different things that have been alleged towards genetic modification and genetically modified foods, but none of them have the science to back it up. And so I would go ahead and flip that around again. I'd be more concerned with the long-term health effects of not utilizing genetic modification. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to produce food. I've said that several times. If you want to grow organic vegetables in your garden or in your farm, in your fields, go for it. Absolutely, please do. If you want to grow genetically modified foods, go for it. Please do. It's all food. It's all safe when you do it according to the standards that exist. So as far as the long-term health effects, it would be really not really a question to me.
Okay. And I just wanted to confirm quickly again. So you were discussing about the whole problem with like land and like geographical disadvantages. So regarding GMOs, so there's not, so you're basically saying that there's no like possible like environmental effects like from GMOs, right? So.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would, really be out of line to eliminate the possibility of any risks in any situation. But the long-term environmental effects of genetically modified foods is producing more food with less inputs, with less land, and being able to use less pesticides, less chemical, and to be able to reduce pollutants as well. Part of the awesome part of genetically modified foods is that we are able to plant more efficiently, and we may not have to use equipment as much, so we're not making an extra pass with the tractor. We're not, using fuel. We're not, we're reducing emissions, but we're also reducing chemical inputs onto the plants themselves. We're reducing, you know, the land that is needed to produce the same amount of food, and we're also reducing the, you know, the risk for introduction of disease to those plants from insects or other issues. So I think, you know, the long-term benefits, long-term environmental benefits, enormously outweigh any risks that could possibly exist.
Okay, I guess we're almost done here. So it was actually like the second to last question here. So what is like, yeah, what is like your, I would say your overall opinion of GMOs?
So I think I myself, on a personal note, am a huge supporter of GMOs. I have seen firsthand, you know, I grew up on a farm. I've worked in several different agricultural positions in a variety of different jobs. And the truth of it is that genetic modification is the way to go. The ability that we have to splice into DNA in a single cell and completely change how a product reacts to certain environments, to certain insects, to certain you know, applications of products is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And it's no different than, you know, genetic modification in humans over time, in animals over time, in anything over time. Everything adapts to its environment. So really, when you look at it from a scientific standpoint, genes, they mutate. Genes adapt, and your genetics, your DNA changes over time. We know this because we've seen plants and animals that have changed from, you know, the 1600s. You know, things look different now because they're adapting to the environment that they're in. So if we have the ability to go in and make very specific changes that then allow a product to flourish in an environment that, you know, may have taken it another 200 years to do naturally, then why not use that technology? You know, it's one of those things where, you know, in animal breeding programs, you know, that's part of genetic modification is, you know, breeding the best two animals together. That's a genetic issue. It's something that has to do with the genes, I guess is what I'm trying to say, of the product that results. But those animals in the natural world, they do that naturally. You know, the strongest animals mate, the weaker animals die. It's part of the natural order of things. We're just kind of getting one step ahead.
Okay. So I was okay for the last one. So I was actually wondering what would be the best way to reach out to my community in terms of passing like the right information, supported by like the correct evidence to like just support all that.
Yeah, I think, you know, what you've been doing with your project has been fantastic. Getting out there and just having that conversation and having the data to back it up. And like you said, you know, finding the correct sources, because as I mentioned earlier, there are so many corporations that have money tied up in their products, and they're always very willing to produce statistics that may not be proven or, you know, gosh, what's the word? That word just completely slipped my mind. But I would definitely suggest, you know, using USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Those studies are done, you know, by the U.S. government and have an enormous amount of data to go off of. So, you know, always turn to the experts, I guess. USDA has an entire service agency that is dedicated to research and putting out information. So the Economic Research Service, or the ERS, puts out a ton of information, both for the United States and around the world. So using that, utilizing data that comes from, you know, and I would even be hesitant to say only using data that comes from independent sources, because in the world that we live in, there is no truly independent source. But that's in any area, any topic area that ever exists. But just making sure that, you know, the research that you're reading isn't biased, and, you know, making sure that like a good researcher, you investigate your sources, and you just make sure that what you're looking at is valuable, is, you know, ethical, and makes sense. Don't just go along with the first study that happens to support your position on a topic. But that goes for so much more than just GMOs. It goes for every topic that you could ever possibly research. But it's definitely important to have accurate sources. Make sure, you know, reach out to your land grant university. They've got a ton of research on the topic, and, you know, really reach for those trusted sources.
Okay. Well, that is it actually. So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate you for allowing me to interview you regarding my
Absolutely.
GMO outreach project. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. I feel like we kind of flew through that, but
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I can stop the recording.